My brother didn't yell. He got quiet. And somehow, that was so much worse. I still hear it sometimes, late at night when the house is still and Lily's asleep down the hall. That voice. Low and deliberate, like he'd been rehearsing it. Right there in Dad's living room, with the Thanksgiving dishes still on the table and the football game still going in the background, Jason crouched down to my 7-year-old daughter's level. He looked her straight in the eyes. And with a calm that genuinely scared me, he said to her, "You know you're not really hers, right? You're like that stray cat she picked up today. Just something she found on the side of the road." The room went dead silent. I felt my body lock up. Every muscle, every nerve, just frozen. Lily didn't fully understand what he meant, but kids always know when something's wrong. I could see it on her face. Her little chin started to tremble. Mark took a step forward, and I put my hand on his arm to stop him. Not yet. At that moment, I didn't react, but 3 hours earlier, everything had still felt like a normal family dinner. "Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm 35 years old. I'm an ER nurse based in suburban Chicago, and what I'm about to tell you happened last Thanksgiving. I know a lot of people have complicated family stories, but this one still gets to me, so let me take you back to that afternoon, because it didn't start in that living room. It started in my car, somewhere on Route 45, about 10 minutes from Dad's house. I was driving. Mark was in the passenger seat, and Lily was in the back, already bored, already asking how much longer. That was pretty much our normal. Mark and I have been married for 4 years. He's not Lily's biological dad. Lily came from a relationship I had before him, one that ended badly and ended early. But Mark? He never treated her like anything other than his own. Not once. Not for a single day. As for me, I'd worked the overnight shift 3 nights that week. So I was running on coffee and whatever energy you scrape together when you're an ER nurse and a mom and you're trying to hold everything together at once. I'd been looking forward to Thanksgiving and also dreading it. Both feelings at the same time. Because Jason was going to be there. My brother Jason, 33 years old, and the last 6 months of his life had been rough. His business went under. His wife left him and took their daughter half the time. He was crashing in a spare room at Dad's place, and every time I thought about seeing him, I felt this low hum of anxiety that I couldn't quite shake. I kept telling myself he just needed time, that he was going through something hard, that family shows up for each other even when it's uncomfortable. I really believed that. Mark reached over and put his hand on mine, somewhere around the halfway point of the drive, and without even looking at me, he said quietly, "It's gonna be fine, Em. Just a few hours." I nodded and let out a slow breath, telling him, I know. But 10 minutes before we reached the house, something on the side of the road changed everything. Lily heard it first. That's always how it is with kids. They notice things you've already trained yourself to tune out. We were maybe a mile from Dad's house, passing a stretch of road that ran alongside an empty field, when Lily suddenly sat up straight in her booster seat and pressed her face against the window. Before I could even register what was happening, she screamed from the back seat, Mom, stop the car. There's a box." I almost didn't. I'm going to be honest with you about that. We were already running a little late, I was tired, and I told myself it was probably nothing. Just trash someone dumped on the side of the road. But Lily had already unbuckled her seatbelt, which she absolutely knew she wasn't supposed to do, and she was pulling at the door handle with both hands, crying out, "Mom, please, something's in there." I heard it. "Please." Mark turned around to look at her, then looked at me. He raised his eyebrows just slightly, the way he does when he's leaving the call to me. I exhaled. I hit the brakes. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder, and the 3 of us walked back to where the box was sitting, half in the ditch, half out. It was a produce box, the kind you see outside grocery stores. The top flaps were folded shut, and when Lily crouched down and carefully lifted one corner, we all heard it. This tiny, broken sound. Not quite a meow. More like something that used to be a meow before whatever had happened to it. Inside was a cat, gray and white, probably not even a year old, curled into itself in one corner of the box. It was shaking. Its breathing was shallow and fast. There was dried blood matted into the fur behind one ear. Lily looked up at me with the kind of expression that makes you forget you're tired, forget you're late, forget every practical reason you had for not stopping. Softly, with her voice already thick, she said to me, "We can't just leave it." And here's the thing about being an ER nurse. You develop a pretty quick sense for when something is close to the edge. And that cat was close to the edge. I looked at Mark. He was already pulling up the address of the nearest emergency vet on his phone. 38 minutes later, we were sitting in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and anxiety, still in our good Thanksgiving clothes, while a vet tech told us the cat had some internal bruising and mild hypothermia, but would most likely be okay with fluids and monitoring overnight. The bill came out to just under $400. Mark didn't flinch. He just handed over the card. On the drive to Dad's house, which by that point had us arriving almost an hour late, Lily sat in the back holding a little paper bag with some sample cat food the vet had given us. She'd already decided the cat's name was Pumpkin. Because it was Thanksgiving, she said, very matter-of-factly. Like that settled it completely. I watched her in the rearview mirror and felt this quiet fullness in my chest. The kind you feel when you've done something small but right. I didn't realize yet that this little animal would become a weapon later that night. Jason was already standing at the door when we arrived, arms crossed, leaning against the frame, watching us pull into the driveway like he'd been there a while. I noticed right away that he wasn't smiling. Not even that polite, surface-level smile people put on when they're trying. Just watching. His eyes moved from my car to Mark, then to Lily, then back to me. And something about that sequence bothered me in a way I couldn't immediately name. We got out, and Lily was still buzzing from the whole cat rescue, bouncing a little on her heels the way she does when she can't contain something. She ran ahead of me toward the door, looking up at her uncle and announcing with full 7-year-old confidence, "We saved a cat today. Her name is Pumpkin, and she almost died, but we paid for her, and now she's gonna be okay." Jason looked down at her for a moment, then he looked at me. And in a flat voice, with zero warmth, he said to me, "You were supposed to be here at 4. I kept my voice even and told him, "We had a situation. We're here now." He stepped aside without another word. Inside, the house smelled like it always did this time of year. Turkey and sage, and the particular warmth of a house with too many people in it. Dad was in the kitchen, managing 3 things at once, the way he always does on holidays, and he called out the moment he heard us come in, saying with genuine relief, "There they are." I was starting to worry. He came out and hugged Lily first, lifting her off the ground the way she still loves, even though she tells people she's too old for it. Then he hugged me, and quietly said close to my ear, "Glad you made it. Jason's been a little off today. Just give him some space." I nodded like I understood, but what I was really thinking was that I'd been giving Jason space for 6 months. 6 months of not calling too much, not asking too many questions, not bringing up the business or the divorce or the money, 6 months of tiptoeing around my own brother because everyone kept saying he just needs time. Jason's daughter, Chloe, was sitting on the floor near the coffee table, coloring in a book. She's 5. Sweet kid. None of this was her fault. None of it. And I want to be clear about that. When Lily spotted her, the two of them immediately fell into that easy rhythm little kids have, the one where they don't need any warm-up. They just start playing like they've been in the middle of the same game for hours. Chloe looked up at Lily with wide eyes and asked in a small voice, "Did you really save a cat?" Lily nodded very seriously and said, "Her name is Pumpkin. She had blood on her head, but the doctor fixed it." Chloe's face lit up completely. She grabbed Lily's hand and pulled her toward the couch, saying, "I want to hear everything." And for a few minutes, watching them together, I let myself relax a little. I poured myself a glass of water in the kitchen, stood next to Dad while he stirred the gravy, and let the noise of the house settle around me. Mark had found his way into a conversation with Dad's neighbor about the bears, and everything looked, on the surface, completely fine. But I could feel Jason across the room. The way you feel a storm before it hits. He wasn't talking much. He wasn't drinking, which surprised me. He was just present, hovering at the edges of every conversation without joining any of them. Watching. Mostly watching us. At one point, I caught his eye from across the room, and I gave him a small nod. The kind that means I see you, I'm not here to fight, we're okay. He looked away without responding. Right then, I told myself he was just struggling. That this was grief, in its own ugly way. That broken people sometimes go quiet before they go mean. I told myself I understood. I was wrong. It started with something small, like it always does. We were maybe 20 minutes into dinner when Lily reached across the table and grabbed Chloe's phone. Not aggressively, not meanly. She just wanted to show Chloe a photo she'd taken of Pumpkin at the vet, the one where the cat was wrapped in a little heated blanket and looking genuinely miserable in the most endearing way possible. Chloe giggled and leaned in to look, and Lily held the phone up between them, narrating the whole story again with full dramatic detail. It was harmless. It was exactly the kind of thing kids do. But Jason saw it differently. From across the table, I watched his jaw tighten. His fork stopped moving. His eyes locked onto Lily's hand holding that phone, and something shifted in his face. A stillness that felt less like calm and more like pressure building behind a wall. He didn't say anything immediately. He just sat there, doing that thing where you're not quite looking at someone but you're not looking away either. Dad noticed the tension and tried to redirect, asking Jason with forced cheerfulness, "So how's the apartment search going? You find anything decent on the north side?" Jason picked up his fork again and said without looking up, "Still looking." Dad nodded and kept going, saying, "Well, the market's tough right now, but it'll turn around. These things always do." And then Chloe, completely unaware of any of this, tugged on Lily's sleeve and said in a bright little voice, "Can we go see Pumpkin after dinner? Can we go to where she is?" Before I could answer, Lily shook her head and explained very gently, "She has to stay at the doctor's tonight. But maybe when she comes home you can come visit her." Chloe's face fell just slightly. She turned to Jason and asked, "Dad, can we go visit the cat when she's better?" And Jason set his fork down. Slowly, deliberately. He looked at Chloe, and then he looked at Lily, and something in his expression went flat in a way that made the back of my neck prickle. He said to Chloe in a measured tone, "We're not going to go visit someone else's cat." The way he said someone else's. Like there was a wall between our side of the table and his. Like Lily was not family, not a child he'd known since she was 3 years old, but a stranger's kid who'd wandered into his space. Lily looked up from the phone. She didn't fully catch it, but I did. Mark did too. I could feel him go still beside me. I kept my voice calm and said across the table to both girls, "How about after dinner you two can look at all the photos together, okay? We've got a whole bunch from the vet." Chloe brightened immediately and said, "Yeah." But Jason wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and said to no one in particular, just loud enough for the table to hear, $400 for a stray. Must be nice. The air changed. Dad looked up from his plate. Mark put his hand flat on the table. I took one slow breath and told Jason in a steady voice. It was the right thing to do. Lily wanted to help. Jason's eyes cut to me then, sharp. And in that quiet, pointed way, he said, "Right. Because what Lily wants always comes first." And there it was. That was the real sentence. Everything else had just been the warm-up. The table went quiet in that particular way. That means everyone heard it, and nobody knows what to do with it. Dad cleared his throat and started to say something about the sweet potatoes. Chloe had stopped smiling and was looking between her dad and me with that confused expression kids get when the adult world stops making sense. I looked at Jason, he looked back at me. And beneath that stare was something I recognized. Not just bitterness. Not just jealousy. It was hunger. The specific hunger of someone who feels like they've been losing for a very long time and has finally decided somebody else is going to lose with them. I held his gaze for one more second. Then I looked back down at my plate. My hands were steady. My voice, when I finally spoke again to ask Dad if he wanted me to refill his water, was steady too. But underneath the table, out of sight, I had pressed my knee hard against Mark's. A signal we'd developed over 4 years of marriage. It means, stay close. And then, just as the conversation around us cautiously restarted, Jason pushed back his chair and stood up. He didn't go to the kitchen. He didn't go to the bathroom. He walked toward the living room, toward where the girls had drifted after dinner, and something in the way he moved, too deliberate, too quiet, made every instinct I'd built over 10 years of emergency, nursing light up at once. I was on my feet before I even made the conscious decision to stand. But I was 2 seconds too late, and then he finally said what he'd been holding in all night. He walked straight toward my daughter, not toward Chloe, not toward the TV or the couch or the kitchen. Straight toward Lily, who was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, still scrolling through the photos on her own little tablet, completely unaware. I came around the corner of the dining room, just in time to see Jason crouch down in front of her. That image is burned into me. A grown man, folding himself down to the level of a 7-year-old, not to be kind, but to make sure she couldn't look away. His voice dropped low, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. He looked her in the eyes and said to her, "You know you're not really hers, right? You're like that cat she picked up today. Just a stray she found somewhere." Lily looked up at him, confused, trying to process the words. Her little face cycling through expressions I couldn't bear to watch. And the room, I mean every single person in that room, went completely still. Chloe had frozen beside her. Dad had appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, dish towel still in his hands, face white. Mark was already moving. I heard my own heartbeat loud in my ears as my body finally unlocked and I stepped forward. But before I could reach them, Jason straightened up and turned to look at me. And in the same flat, deliberate tone, he said directly to my face, "She deserves to know the truth, Emily. You can't keep pretending she's something she's not." Right then, everything went sideways. Mark crossed the room in 3 steps and put himself between Jason and Lily, his voice tight and controlled as he said, "You need to back up right now." Jason didn't flinch. He looked at Mark with something close to contempt and said back to him, "This isn't your business. This is between me and my sister." Mark didn't move an inch. His voice dropped lower, and he told Jason, "You just said that to a 7-year-old. That makes it everybody's business." Dad stepped into the room then, his voice strained as he said to Jason, "That's enough. That is enough." But Jason turned to Dad with something I'd never seen on his face before, a kind of desperation dressed up as righteousness, and he said loudly, "Why does everyone keep protecting her? She shows up here with her perfect husband and her nurse salary and her rescued cat, and nobody says a word, but my whole life falls apart and I'm supposed to just sit at the table and smile?" His voice cracked on that last word. Just slightly. But he kept going. He turned back to me and said in a voice that was trying to sound like he was delivering facts, "I talked to someone who knew your ex. He told me Lily might not even be yours biologically, that you adopted her without telling anyone the full story, that this whole thing is a lie." I felt the floor tilt, not physically, but that specific sensation when something hits you so hard, your brain takes a half-second to catch up with what just happened. Adopted. He'd said adopted, like it was a slur, like it changed something fundamental about who my daughter was, like it was a weapon, and he'd just decided to use it. The air in the room felt thick and wrong. Chloe had started crying quietly, not even sure why, just responding to the temperature of the room the way little kids do. Lily was still sitting on the floor. She hadn't moved. She was looking at me with those eyes, dark and searching, trying to read my face to understand what was happening to her. And I saw the exact moment it started to land. Not the words, She didn't fully understand the words yet, but the feeling behind them, the way her uncle had said it, the way everyone had reacted, that particular childhood horror of suddenly not being sure where you belong. Her chin started to tremble. Her eyes filled up. And then she looked at me and said in a voice so small it nearly took me out entirely, "Mommy, what does he mean?" I crossed the room. I didn't look at Jason. I didn't look at Dad or Mark. I went straight to Lily, got down on my knees in front of her, took both her hands in mine, and looked her dead in the eyes. I kept my voice as steady as I possibly could and told her, "It means nothing, baby. You are mine. You have always been mine. Nothing about that is ever going to change." She held my gaze for a moment and then collapsed into me, her arms around my neck, crying in that silent, full-body way that breaks you open. I held her tight. Over her shoulder, I looked up at Jason. He was still standing there, and whatever he thought he was going to feel in this moment, satisfaction, relief, justice, I could see it wasn't there. Just his face, pale and strange, like he'd lit a fire and was only now realizing he was standing too close to it. Mark walked to the entryway, picked up Lily's coat from the hook, and brought it to me without a word. I stood up, lifted Lily into my arms, and carried her toward the front door. Dad called after me, his voice rough with something that was either guilt or grief or both, saying, "Emily, Emily, wait, let's just talk about this." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. And without raising my voice even slightly, I said into the door, "Not tonight, Dad." I grabbed my daughter's coat, I grabbed my bag, and I walked out into the cold Thanksgiving night without saying goodbye to anyone. The door shut behind us, and the silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I wish I could say I ignored what he said. I wish I could tell you that I walked out of that house, buckled Lily into her seat, drove home, and never gave Jason's words a second thought. But that's not what happened. The drive home was quiet. Lily fell asleep about 15 minutes in, worn out from crying, her cheek pressed against the window, and her fingers still loosely curled around my phone case, the way she sometimes holds things when she's anxious. Mark drove. He kept one hand on the wheel and one hand on my knee the whole way, not saying anything, just making sure I knew he was there. And I sat in the passenger seat staring at the road ahead and trying to locate the place inside me where I was absolutely certain. Where the doubt couldn't get in. The problem was I couldn't find it. And that terrified me more than anything Jason had actually said. Here's something I've never told most people. Lily's biological father, his name was Derek, and our relationship ended when Lily was 4 months old. It ended badly. There was a period of about 6 weeks after she was born where things between us were so unstable, so chaotic, that some of those days are genuinely blurry to me now. I was sleep-deprived and scared and alone, in a way I hadn't been prepared for. Derek was in and out, unreliable, in ways I kept making excuses for, until I couldn't anymore. I knew Lily was mine. I had carried her for 9 months. I had been in that delivery room. I had every memory of every moment. But Jason had planted something, this tiny, poisonous seed of what if. And no matter how many times I told myself it was absurd, no matter how many times logic showed up to remind me that I was being manipulated by a bitter, broken man who wanted company in his misery, that seed was still there, sitting in the dark, waiting. The days after Thanksgiving were some of the hardest I can remember. I went back to work because I had to. You don't call out of the ER because your family imploded at dinner. You put on your scrubs and you show up and you take care of other people's emergencies because that's the job. But in every quiet moment between patients, in every elevator ride, in every parking lot at the end of a shift, it was there. That voice. Not even Jason's voice anymore. My own voice. Asking questions I hated myself for asking. Lily noticed. Kids always notice. She didn't say anything directly because she's 7 and she didn't have the words for what she was sensing, but she started sleeping with the light on again, something she hadn't done since she was 5. She started following me from room to room more than usual. One afternoon, she came and sat on the bathroom floor while I was getting ready for work, just sat there with her back against the tub, and when I looked down at her and asked what was up, she looked at me with those steady dark eyes and said quietly, "I just want to be near you." I had to turn back to the mirror so she wouldn't see my face. And then there was Pumpkin. We'd picked the cat up from the vet 2 days after Thanksgiving, and Lily had been over the moon, carrying her around the apartment in a blanket like she was made of glass. But I noticed that Lily had started talking to Pumpkin the way kids sometimes talk to animals when they're working something out that they can't say to a person. One evening, I passed the hallway and heard Lily sitting on her bedroom floor, Pumpkin in her lap, saying very softly to the cat, "It doesn't matter where you came from. You're ours now, right? You're ours." I stood in that hallway for a long moment, my back against the wall, eyes on the ceiling, trying to breathe through it. Mark was the one who finally said it out loud. It was a Sunday night, almost 2 weeks after Thanksgiving. We were doing dishes together and the apartment was quiet, and he had been watching me for days with that careful, patient attention he has, waiting until I was ready to talk. He turned off the faucet, dried his hands, and said to me directly, "I think you need to take a test." I didn't say anything right away. He kept going, his voice careful and steady. "Not because I think he's right. I don't. But because you need to be able to look Lily in the face and tell her the truth without that thing in the back of your head. You deserve to get rid of it. She deserves a mom who's not carrying this." I stared at the dish in my hands for a long moment. Something in my chest was pulling in 2 directions at once, part of me furious that we had even gotten to this point, that Jason had done this. That I was standing in my own kitchen on a Sunday night, even entertaining this. And another part of me, the quiet, exhausted part, knowing Mark was right. I set the dish down, and without looking up, I said to him, "Okay." That's when Mark suggested something I never thought I'd need. A DNA test. The results came back in a plain white envelope. No dramatic packaging, no special delivery. Just a standard envelope sitting in the mailbox between a utility bill and a grocery store flyer, like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the thing I'd been unable to sleep over for the past 10 days. I brought it inside, without opening it. Set it on the kitchen counter. Made coffee I didn't drink. Stood at the window and watched a neighbor walk his dog around the block and come back and go inside, and still, I hadn't touched it. Mark was at work. Lily was at school. I had specifically arranged it this way because I knew, whatever was in that envelope, I needed to be alone when I opened it. I needed to not have to manage anyone else's reaction on top of my own. I finally picked it up around 10 in the morning. I stood right there at the counter, didn't even sit down, and I tore it open. I read the results once. Then I read them again. Then I set the paper down flat on the counter and put both hands on the edge of the counter and just stood there. The test confirmed what I already knew. Lily was my biological daughter. 100%. No ambiguity, no footnotes. Just a clean, clinical, absolute confirmation of something that should never have been in question for even a single second. I waited to feel relief. And relief did come. Eventually. But it wasn't the first thing. The first thing was something much uglier. It was shame. Not shame about the result. Shame about the fact that I had done it at all. That I had swabbed the inside of my daughter's cheek while she sat at the kitchen table eating cereal, telling her it was just a little health check the doctor wanted, watching her open her mouth without a second thought, because she trusted me completely, and then sending that sample off to a lab because a bitter, broken man had whispered a lie at Thanksgiving dinner, and I had let it get inside me. I had let it get inside me. That thought sat in my chest like a stone all morning. I called Mark. He picked up on the second ring, and before he could even say hello, I told him, "She's mine. It's confirmed." He was quiet for just a moment, and then he said, his voice rough with something between relief and anger, "Of course she is. I know. I know." I couldn't say anything back. He said gently, "You okay?" And I told him honestly, "Not yet." I spent the rest of that morning sitting on the couch doing nothing. not watching TV, not scrolling my phone, just sitting with the full weight of what the last 2 weeks had actually been. Because here's the thing about being an ER nurse. You're trained to stay functional under pressure. You compartmentalize. You set things aside and deal with them later because there's always something more urgent in front of you. And I had compartmentalized this so well, so efficiently, that I hadn't fully let myself see what it was doing to me, what it was doing to Lily. I thought about the light she'd started sleeping with again, the way she followed me from room to room, the way she sat on the bathroom floor, just to be near me, the conversation she'd had with Pumpkin in her bedroom, the one she didn't know I'd heard. "You're ours now, right? You're ours." She was 7 years old, and she was quietly, privately reassembling her sense of where she belonged, because some adult had cracked it open at a holiday dinner. And then I, her mother, the one person who was supposed to be her absolute certainty, had spent 2 weeks with doubt written all over my face that she was too perceptive not to notice. Right then, sitting on that couch with an envelope on the counter, I did something I hadn't done since the night we drove home from Thanksgiving. I cried. Not the controlled, private kind of crying I'd been managing in parking lots and shower stalls. The real kind. The ugly, full kind. The kind that comes from a place you've been sealing off because there wasn't time, there was never time, and then all at once there's nothing left to hold it back. I cried for a while. And when I was done, I washed my face, changed my shirt, and sat down at the kitchen table with a very clear thought forming in the center of everything. This wasn't over. Jason had done this deliberately. He had stood in our father's living room and looked my daughter in the eyes and used her as a target because he was in pain, and he wanted company in it. And then the ripple of that had moved through 2 weeks of our lives like something I couldn't measure or contain. Lily had been sleeping with the light on. She had been sitting on bathroom floors just to stay close to me. She had been talking to a rescued cat about belonging. My daughter was 7 years old and she had been carrying something no 7-year-old should have to carry, and I had let it go on for 2 weeks before I'd done anything. I looked at the envelope on the counter one more time. Then I looked away from it, because it suddenly felt irrelevant. The result wasn't the point. It had never really been the point. The point was that Jason had aimed at my child deliberately, knowingly, and walked away from it without consequence. And that, I decided in that moment, was not something I was willing to let stand. I picked up my phone, I looked up the number I'd been sitting on for a week and a half, and I made the call. That's when I decided. I wasn't going to let this go. I sat across from a lawyer and told him everything. His name was David Keller. He came recommended by a colleague at the hospital who'd gone through a nasty custody situation 2 years prior, and he had the kind of quiet, unhurried manner that made you feel like nothing you said was going to shock him. His office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, clean and spare, with a view of the city that I barely noticed, because I spent the entire meeting staring at my own hands on the table. I started from the beginning. The car ride, the cat, the dinner. The way Jason had crouched down in front of Lily, the exact words he'd used, the 2 weeks that followed, the DNA test, all of it. He listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment before he leaned forward slightly and said to me in a measured tone, "What you're describing could support 2 separate claims. Defamation, based on the false statement he made about your daughter's origins, and intentional infliction of emotional distress, given that the statement was made deliberately, in front of witnesses, and directed at a minor child." I looked at him and asked, "Do I have a real case?" He met my eyes and said carefully, "You have a credible one. The witnesses help significantly. Your father was present, your husband was present, there were children in the room. The fact that the statement was false and that you have documentation proving it false, that matters. The impact on your daughter's behavior in the weeks following, that matters too." Something in my chest tightened as he kept going, setting his pen down and saying, "What I want you to understand is that these cases are winnable, but they're not simple. Civil suits involving family members tend to be emotionally expensive even when they're legally straightforward. You'll be asked to relive this in detail, in deposition, potentially in court. Your daughter may be involved. Your father may be subpoenaed. Are you prepared for what that looks like? I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked him, what would I be trying to get out of this? Realistically. He said, damages for emotional distress, a formal legal record of what occurred, and depending on how things develop, a restraining order if you feel your daughter needs that protection going forward. I nodded slowly. He continued. But I want to ask you something before we go any further. What do you actually want from your brother? Because sometimes people come in here wanting justice, and what they really want is an acknowledgement, a real one. And occasionally the threat of a lawsuit produces that more effectively than the lawsuit itself. I looked out the window for the first time since I'd sat down. The city was gray and cold out there, midwinter Chicago doing what it always does. I thought about Jason crouching down in front of Lily. I thought about her chin trembling. I thought about pumpkin and bathroom floors and sleeping with the light on. And then I thought about something else. I thought about Jason at that dinner table. The way his voice had cracked on that last word when he said his whole life had fallen apart. The way he'd looked standing in the living room after Lily started crying, pale and strange, like he was only just now understanding what he'd actually done. I didn't feel sorry for him. I want to be clear about that. Whatever he was going through did not give him the right to do what he did. Pain is not a permission slip. But something David Keller had said was sitting with me. What do you actually want? I picked up my bag and told the lawyer, I want to file. But before I do, I need to do one thing first. He looked at me steadily and said, okay, I said to him, I need to hear it from him directly, why he did it. Not through a lawyer. Not through my dad, not through a text message. I need to look at him and hear him say it, and then I'll decide. David Keller nodded once. He said, that's your right, just be careful. Don't discuss the potential lawsuit with him directly. Don't make any promises. And don't go alone. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked back out into the cold. In the elevator on the way down, I pulled out my phone and looked at Jason's contact information. I hadn't called him since Thanksgiving, hadn't texted, hadn't responded to the 2 messages he'd sent in the first week after, both of them vague and non-apologetic in the way people write when they know they've done something wrong but aren't ready to say so. I stared at his name on the screen for a long time. Mark had offered to come with me and I'd told him no. Not because I didn't want the support, but because I needed Jason to see me without a buffer. Without someone else in the room to perform for or deflect toward. I needed it to be just the 2 of us, the way it used to be when we were kids, back before everything got complicated and comparative and corrosive. Before he looked at my life and saw something that made him want to break things. I put my phone back in my pocket and stepped out into the wind. I knew where he was staying. Dad had told me, reluctantly, during a phone call the week before, his voice careful and sad in the way it gets when he's caught between his children and doesn't know how to hold both of them at once. Jason was in a short-term rental on the west side. Small place, month to month, but before filing, I needed to hear one thing from him. Why? When I found him, I barely recognized my own brother. I'd texted him the night before, kept it short, just told him I was coming by, and that he could either be there or not. He was there. He opened the door before I even knocked, which told me he'd been waiting. The apartment was small in the way that feels intentional, like someone had taken a normal-sized life and compressed it down to the minimum required to keep going. A couch, a folding table, 2 chairs, a duffel bag half unpacked in the corner, no art on the walls, no real food visible in the kitchen area. Just the particular emptiness of a place someone is sleeping in but not actually living in. Jason looked like the apartment. He'd lost weight. His eyes had that flat, overworked quality of someone who hadn't been sleeping, and his clothes were clean but just barely, the kind of clean that takes effort when everything else has stopped taking effort. He stepped back to let me in without saying anything. I came in and stood near the door because I wasn't ready to sit down yet. We looked at each other across that small space, and the silence between us had years in it. Finally, I said to him, keeping my voice level, "I need you to tell me why you did it. Not an excuse. The actual reason." He looked at the floor. For a long moment, I thought he was going to deflect, going to give me something lawyered and useless. But then he sat down heavily on the couch and put his face in his hands, and when he looked up again, something had shifted. His voice came out rough and uneven as he said to me, "I watched you walk in that day with Mark and Lily and your whole put-together life, and something just broke in me. I know that's not an excuse. I know it isn't." He stopped, started again. His voice dropped lower as he continued. "Sandra took Chloe to her sister's for Christmas. I get her every other weekend now. Every other weekend, Emily. I used to tuck her in every single night, and now I get her 8 days a month." His jaw worked for a second before he said, "And I sat there watching Lily hang off you and watching Mark look at her like she hung the moon, and I just kept thinking, why does she get all of that? Why does everything work out for you?" Right then, a slow, cold wave moved through me. Not sympathy. Not yet. Something more complicated than that. He looked up at me with red eyes and said quietly, "I wanted you to feel what I was feeling. I wanted something to crack open in your life the way everything cracked open in mine. That's the truth. That's all of it." The room was very still. Outside I could hear traffic, someone's radio, a dog barking 2 floors up. Ordinary sounds from a world that was just continuing on normally while we sat in this wreckage. I looked at my brother, at what was left of him, and I felt something shift in my chest that I didn't entirely want to feel because I wasn't ready to feel it yet. But it was there. I thought about Lily on the bathroom floor, and then I thought about Chloe, 5 years old, 8 days a month. Standing there in that stripped-down apartment, I realized something I hadn't expected to realize. Destroying him wouldn't fix my daughter. I told him I wouldn't sue, but only on one condition. He looked up at me slowly, like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. I held his gaze and said to him clearly, "You're going to apologize to Lily. Not to me, not to Dad, to her. In person, face to face, and you're going to make it something a 7-year-old can actually understand and hold on to. Because she's the one you hurt." He nodded immediately and said, "Okay, yes, whatever you need." I stopped him right there. I told him, "Don't agree that fast. I need you to actually mean it. Because if you walk into my apartment and say something halfway and she feels it, I will file those papers the same afternoon. Do you understand me?" He flinched. "Good." He sat with it for a moment and then said quietly, "I understand." I picked up my bag. I wasn't ready to hug him or tell him it was going to be okay, because I didn't know if it was. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But I also wasn't going to drag my daughter through a civil lawsuit and depositions and all the machinery of legal consequence if there was another way to give her what she actually needed, which wasn't a court ruling. It was someone looking her in the eyes and telling her that what had been said was wrong, that she was real and she was loved, and the words had meant nothing. At the door, I turned back and said to him one last time, "You've got one shot at this, Jason. Don't waste it." He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with those hollowed-out eyes and nodded once. I walked out into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. I stood there for a second, breathing in the quiet. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt tired in a way that went all the way down. A week later, he stood at my door. 6 months have passed since that night, and my life hasn't gone back to normal. I'm not sure it will, but it has gone forward, which I've decided is enough. When Jason showed up at my door that Saturday morning, he was holding a small stuffed animal, a gray and white cat. Close enough to Pumpkin that Lily recognized it immediately from across the living room and went still. He crouched down in front of her, the same way he had at Thanksgiving, and this time I let myself watch without moving. His voice was unsteady as he said to her, "I said something really mean to you at Grandpa's house. It wasn't true, and it wasn't okay, and I'm sorry. You belong exactly where you are. And I was wrong. Lily studied him for a long moment with those serious dark eyes. Then she looked at me. I gave her a small nod. She looked back at Jason and said, with the kind of matter-of-fact grace that only 7-year-olds can pull off, "Okay. Do you want to meet Pumpkin?" Jason laughed. It came out a little broken, but it was real. He said, "Yeah, I'd really like that." I watched the two of them sit on the living room floor together, Pumpkin threading her way between them with zero interest in the emotional weight of the moment, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not everything, but something. Lily has stopped sleeping with the light on. She stopped following me room to room. She's back to being fully, loudly, exhaustingly herself, which is the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Mark and I still talk about that night. Probably always will. Dad called me a few weeks after Jason's visit, his voice older than I remembered, and said to me, "I should have stepped in sooner." "I'm sorry I didn't," I told him. "I know, Dad. I know. As for Jason and me, we're not okay. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. There are boundaries now that didn't exist before, clear ones, and I intend to keep them. But I didn't destroy him. And he didn't destroy us. Pumpkin is doing great, by the way. Fully recovered. Absolutely convinced she runs the apartment. She's not wrong. Here's what I know now, that I didn't know the night I walked out of my father's house carrying my daughter in the cold. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. You can choose not to go to court and still refuse to pretend nothing happened. And you can be someone's mother so completely, so absolutely, so without question, that no whispered lie in a living room ever gets to touch it. Not really, not where it counts. So I'll ask you what I've been thinking about ever since. Would you have forgiven him? Or would you have taken him to court? Tell me what you would have done.